I wanted to talk about the, let me take this off now, you guys have read that. I want to talk about the speaker comparisons from the past 2 days, because it's been very interesting to me to watch people's opinions and comments about that. I very deliberately, to some people's displeasure, did it as blind, so you don't know which speaker is which. And people were making, I have this speaker, therefore I love this speaker, therefore the speaker that I prefer the sound of here must be that speaker. Not always the case. I've had people describe, I don't like this brand of speaker because they are always the X, Y, or Z, and that's why I like this other speaker in this test, whereas the speaker that they were just saying that is always bad is a speaker they like the sound of. More interestingly, to take a long view, is that I think it's interesting that we have very different vocabularies to describe things. In both examples, all three examples, people tended to describe speaker A as brighter than speaker B. Speaker B, especially on the part 2 clip, where speaker B was actually brighter, it had more high end. Speaker A had more upper mid-range. And I thought it was very interesting that a lot of people were describing upper mid-range like 1K, 2K, a prominence there, a spike around 1.5, 2K. That was their bright. Whereas to me, and I'm not saying that I'm the only one, but I come from an audio engineering background and I have very good hearing for 54 years old. And this is my gig. I do this. I listen for things. To me, the upper mid-range is great and very necessary, but it's the 5K stuff that's the high end. So you guys want to know which speaker is which? Before I tell you that, here's the thing that I did not put in that in the videos, because it would just been a big bunch of information which would seem to invalidate the whole thing. The Alessandro was a speaker that had many hours of playing time on it, whereas the Warehouse G12C and the ET65 were both brand new out of the box, so they have not broken in at all. So while I thought it was still representative, I know for a fact that both those speakers, if I could have had 6 weeks of gigging on them, would have sounded better, because they do sound better after they've broken in. That's a real thing with speakers because it's a mechanical movement. It's a mechanical diaphragm, and as it moves, it opens up. The glue loosens up, et cetera, et cetera. So the ET65 in my shop cab, which has been played on for years and years now, sounds better than the brand new out-of-the-box ET65. But my shop cab is a very large volume 2x12, which would be an unfair comparison to a deluxe reverb cabinet, which was the core of this. And it'd be very difficult to have the mic in precisely the same location on a large 2x12 as it was on the deluxe reverb. As you might have seen in the video, I just put some tape down so that I could move the cabs in the same spot and not move the microphone. So, that said, while the warehouses were not at their best in comparison to the Alessandro, I do think that the overall characteristics of the speakers were still represented pretty accurately. So in all three tests, speaker A was the Alessandro GA-SC64, which is a really good sounding speaker, especially in a deluxe reverb cabinet, because the cabinet does not have a lot of low end, and that kind of works. So you're not missing the low end because it has a lower mid emphasis rather than a true fundamental for things. The ET65, you could really hear that on that little bit of Wind Cries Mary, has an octave below the Alessandro. So if you really want the full range, that was there on the warehouses much more than the Alessandro. I like all three speakers for different things. I think if you're doing a very clean Stratty kind of thing, the G12C is just perfect. It's very C12N with a Strat kind of Fender sound. The Alessandro's got a lot of mid-range punch, It really sits perfectly in a lot of contexts, as does the ET65, but they have the ET65 is not a scooped speaker, but it's not as prominent. It's a little bit flatter. So think of it as this is the ET65 is the midpoint, and the G12C is scooped, and the Alessandro has got upper mid-range peak. So all three are really good. For a long time, the Alessandro was out of stock from my suppliers, but that's a speaker I'll be recommending now that it's in stock regularly after the whole COVID thing. I will be recommending that as a very good option to players. I also know that the Eminence Texas Heat is a really nice choice for tele players in a deluxe reverb. The other thing about that comparison was that, as you saw, and you can see in the thumbnail for this video, I did not adjust the amp to make any speaker sound better. I knew that if I were to dial in, to change the knobs so that this speaker was at its best, someone else would say, oh, that speaker would have sounded so much better if you hadn't done that. I don't like those knob settings, or would think that I was trying to make one speaker sound better than another. So I thought leaving the amp just set to noon revealed the differences in the speaker. Now, if you found one was too bright or not bright enough, you could adjust that. If you wanted more or less mids, you could adjust that. If you wanted more or less low end, you could adjust that. Like on the ET65, if I wanted that to sound more like the Alessandro, I would have turned the bass down to just about 4, a little bit 4. Just probably a little bit lower than 4. And I've got an added mid-range knob on the back of that amp. I left it at 6.8K precisely. I could turn that up to about 9K, and those upper mids would have come through, et cetera, et cetera. So, Lou, if you're not getting audio, you may not be live. Make sure that there's a button on the screen where you can choose it to be live. You may be a few minutes before. So the real solution is to have cabs with multiple cabs and multiple speakers. But as a rule of thumb, if you want just one speaker for a deluxe reverb, it's really hard to beat the ET65, the Alessandro, and the Celestion Creamback 65. Those are three. If you're not happy with that, something else is wrong with you. So I will update the descriptions of all those videos after this chat, so people will be able to get that information. I wasn't trying to make some mystery for the sake of clicks, but I think that if people knew what they were listening to when they were listening to it, they would form opinions based on what their preconceptions were rather than what they're actually hearing. And I know for a fact that a lot of people's preconceptions in the comments was very wrong. It was a lot of work to do that test, to get that set up so everything is, the variables were all controlled. I did not have time to do a higher gain test with the 335. I'll do that down the road. I think I'm going to order the Alessandro, and I need to have like a 1x12 with that, and a 1x12 with maybe the ET65, because the 2x12 is just too big an advantage over the deluxe reverb cabinet. Anyway, let's get to people's questions. Thank you, Joseph White. Appreciate that. Is speaker coil rub possible if only at certain high volume and particular notes, or am I barking up the wrong tree looking for my buzz in my new speaker? No, you can have very minor or incipient speaker voice coil rub that only reveals itself at certain frequencies and certain volumes. Eventually, it's going to be, it's going to get to the point where it's going to deteriorate and it'll always be there. You could also have a tear in a speaker. You could also have loose hardware in the cabinet or something resonating sympathetically inside. Cabinet construction can be very difficult to nail everything down, particularly in old funky stuff using light materials typically from the 50s and early 60s. I'm looking at you, Valco. But let me show you guys how to test for voice coil rub because I've got one here that does it. Let me get one from the other room. Let me take this stupid thing off. All right, so here is an old Eminence Alnico 10. This was a very good speaker when it was new. Let's see if I can do this so you can hear it. Make sure I'm not touching anything I don't want to touch. Take my hands like this. Usually I would do this with the speaker down, but I'm doing it so you can see it. You just kind of, I'm going to let you, hopefully the mic will pick this up. Let's see. Tricky to do. Does that come through? Can you hear that? So that's this thing sounds awful. Its mate, which sounds good, you know, this was a 2x10 in a Vibrolux, doesn't do that when I do the same thing. Now, normally I would put it face up like this. Let's see if I can get you to see it. Well, it'd be like this on a table, and I'd be very carefully pushing evenly, just moving the cone straight up and down, and you can hear it kind of go. Yeah, that's the rubbing voice coil. Now here's an old Oxford. This is one of the other signs of a bad speaker. Someone fixed it with whiteout, I think.